So the first order of business today really should be the news that broke the morning as we are recording this, which is the passing of someone we have honored in the LA Film Critics Association for several times, I believe, Agnès Varda. Legendary figure of the French New Wave, the widow of the great Jacques Demy, an extraordinary filmmaker in her own right, Cleo 9 to 5, all the way up to Faces Places, when she became second oldest Oscar nominee in history, second only to James Ivory, because she was born 9 days later, or something like that. So Agnès passed at age 90 from breast cancer, which I think is just, breast cancer is always a horrible, horrible thing, but at age 90... I kind of feel like that's what, she should have been like, I made it, right? Now I'm just going to die of steady old age. I'm not going to get hit by any illnesses, and that's just a horrible thing. So we honored her at least twice since the time I've been there.
Yeah, including recently for Faces Places. And a really wonderful personality, a great. By the way, that's a really great movie. That's a great sort of documentary. Her and what's the French guy who wears glasses? What's his name? JD, CJ, whatever. The muralist. Yeah, he's a photographer, muralist, and they were kind of a great team. I mean, in addition to that movie, they had this sort of thing that they were doing where they roamed around the nation doing all this press for the movie. And they were almost like Laurel and Hardy, where they just did this sort of boyfriend-girlfriend thing. And it was funny and sweet, and she was so sharp, sometimes way sharper than him. And
she was the thing that I always loved about her, and especially when if you had any opportunity to converse with her, even when she was in her 80s, there at our award ceremony, and people, we know people who had her as an instructor at USC as well. But she was endlessly curious about everything. It was not typical. She always had that weird hair colorization, right? Yeah. Like, she dyed her hair except for the crown. She left it kind of like all gray around the crown, just to be funky. Yeah. She was a funky old lady. Yeah, she was. And you would expect someone in her position, like most filmmakers of that age, with any kind of a legacy, to be sort of all about herself. Oh, come and kiss the ring and tell me how great I am. What movie of mine was your favorite? Yes. Well, tell me. And she didn't want to talk about herself. No. She wanted to talk about you. What music are the kids listening to today? What's hip today? What's hot? What's cool in pop culture? What's the new thing?
The thing she liked to talk about. The thing she liked to talk about the least were movies she made 60 years ago. Yeah, she's and she got it, people. But she's like, no. And she was very up on all things modern and all things today, constantly. And not willing to spend her time simply walking down memory lane.
Except in Beaches of Agnès, that was the one nostalgic piece she did. But even that was really very avant-garde for it, not really a documentary at all. It's sort of modernistically reflexive. She was an amazing, forward-looking, curious, warm lady. And it's sad that she's gone. But in 90, she lived a good life, right to the end, never stopped working, and leaves really an extraordinary legacy. And the only woman who is a seminal figure of the French New Wave. If you haven't seen Cleo 9 to 5, you just have to. It's really
the only behind the camera director. And it's wonderful that she has not been left out of that canon. Yeah, as has happened over the course of the history of cinema with many women who have been left out of the canon. She was not left out of that canon. They talked about her. Yeah, Godard, not well, they didn't go on, but nevertheless, he had to recognize. Who she was
in the mix, and they all loved it. And the funny thing was that Jacques Demy, her husband, was not a French New Wave figure. He was a contemporary of the New Wavers, but did his own thing. Yeah. But she, just really a wonderful figure. So that's unfortunate. And of course we've been talking a bit about the Writers Guild and the Association of Talent Agent standoff, which is April 6th is the big day. That's the big day that the the agreement expires that was signed originally in 1976. 43 years. So if you do the math and you think, whatever agreement they come to after invariably fighting in the courts, that is going to span another 46 years, or 43 years, or whatever it is. So 43 years. So you're talking well after you and I will probably have left, and if we're still around, we'll still be doing this podcast, but we won't be coherent. It'll be
and somehow we'll probably still feel like the writers got screwed. I've just never known the writers not to get screwed in the context of anything to do with Hollywood.
In 43 years, I can see us sitting here in front of the microphones going, this week we have a DVD. For those of you who don't remember what DVDs are, back in the day when they actually had players, we don't talk about new DVDs anymore. We just talk about DVDs that we own.
Oh, man. What will the film business be? What will the television prognostication. How do you see it? 50 years from now, 40 years from now, frankly, even 25 years from now. To be honest, the theatrical, I see that going all to tentpoles.
Yes, I agree. The theatrical business is not going to go away, but it is going to become more. And I felt this way for a long time, and I think I'm right. I think we are going to see things go back to something of the way that they were in the 1960s. The 1950s and 60s, where
at the end of the studio system,
where we have movie theaters everywhere. We don't really have first run, second run, third run anymore. That's what it used to be. There were first run theaters, and then there were the second run and third run theaters, and there were drive-ins, and there were theaters where you would see exploitation films and low budget films or dollar films that had already played out. There were a lot of different tiers to that. That doesn't really exist anymore. There aren't these second run, third run, and that was true right into the 90s. You still had that.
Oh yeah.
So that's gone away now, and you have too many theaters that are in theory first run theaters. I think we are going to get to a place where streaming and television and all these other options, that is effectively your second and third run, where a lot of movies that really don't need to live in theaters will go there. You're going to see a reduction in screens, but I think we'll go back to, if not movie palaces, something that makes the theatrical experience more than your living room, right? Because I've said it before, I've said it again, the problem is that as living rooms become more like theaters, theaters become more like living rooms, and there's no differentiation between the two. Theaters have to become theaters again. And when they do, the only movies that will really earn the right to be shown there will be big movies.
Right.
And so we're going to get back to, the era of the widescreen blockbusters, about, 1956 to about 1969, that kind of a model. That's where I think we're going to get back to. And theaters will be big, and they'll be glamorous and spectacular. Prices will have to come down, and it'll be a worthwhile experience for people. But most of the material will probably live on streaming, and people will spend most of their entertainment time with streaming.
So mainstream dramas, even mainstream comedies that don't have big special effects or anything to do with anyone wearing tights or a cape.
Yeah.
Do you see those film? I mean, mainstream dramas. William Hurt film from 1990.
The Doctor.
The Doctor.
Yeah.
That film with that level of movie star still not in movie theaters. Out of Africa, not in movie theaters.
If they're made by studios. And that's the thing we're talking about now. Look, 4,000 people being laid off from 20th Century Fox in the merger with Disney, which is breaking our hearts because we know these people.
Yeah, particularly Fox 2000 taking the brunt of that hit.
That's upsetting to me. Fox 2000, a powerful creator of original content and run by a woman. Stacey Snider, another extraordinary woman with a great legacy. They're cutting loose a lot of great ladies. The one they're keeping is obviously Fox Searchlight, co-headed by a woman, and Nancy is terrific. I mean, she's really, really bright. So that's obviously something that's a bone to the creative community that they're not going to attack. But it's clear they want to focus on TV and that they don't want Fox to continue to exist as a relevant theatrical brand because it's not in the Disney mold. It's not something they do.
Yep.
So that's so what does that do? Well, that's consolidation. And I know people are like, oh my gosh, but wait a minute. We now have Amazon, and now Apple just entered the marketplace, and Netflix. Those are 3 massive new players, more than we've had in a long time.
None of whom are in the theatrical film distribution business. Not really Netflix either.
No, but they're going to have to. At some point, they're going to have to really enter that in a big way, because there will be an opportunity and they won't be able to resist it. And so now we're getting back to the way that things were. You know, if you go back to 1920, there were a whole lot of studios.
Yeah.
Like a lot of studios. And the marketplace could not support all of them. So then they started doing these mergers, because you had Metro and Sam Goldwyn and Louis B. Mayer, who all came together and created, ta-da, MGM, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, hence the name. You know, First National was a producer of a lot of really interesting movies, and then they folded in with Warner Brothers. You had Lasky's Famous Players, folded in with Paramount Publics Corporation, became Paramount Pictures. You know, so you have all of these things that went on over time, UA eventually even becoming part of MGM. You know, that consolidation is kind of part of the history of Hollywood.
Yeah, but those consolidations were consolidations between movie studios and other movie studios.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we hit that period where the consolidation came under the auspices of these big corporations.
That's been a
Western.
problem. Yeah.
And
Charlie Bluedorn.
Oh, yeah. You know, Sony eventually. Yeah. All of that kind of. Now, that was a different kind of acquisition and consolidation.
And the thing that hit me a few months ago, I keep meaning to write a piece about this, but I never do, because I don't have enough time. But the thing that hit me some years ago was when I was standing in the lobby of the Thalberg building on the Sony lot after a screening. And it's a great old building, right? I mean, it's a great old building, and it's, you know, it's classic old Hollywood, and it smells like you could smell the sweat of somebody who was, you know, trying to make a decision in 1932.
Yeah.
And the screening rooms are all in the basement. And it's beautiful, and all the Oscars won by Columbia Pictures are right there in the lobby, kind of in, you know, on either side of the guard's reception desk, and there are like 12 of them.
Yeah.
And that is tied with RKO for the most Academy Award wins by any studio. It's significant.
Yeah.
And I was looking at them, and I just love to sit there and kind of look at them, you know, From Here to Eternity and Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai and The Last Emperor. And then it hit me. Every single one of those came between, like, you know, I think from all of Frank Capra's stuff, right? From 1931 or 32, whenever it was, all the way to 1987. That's all of them. Nothing since 1987 in The Last Emperor. Columbia Pictures has not won a Best Picture since 1987. They were winning about every 4 years. Every 4 or 5 years, they were getting a Best Picture. And then since 1987, nothing. You know what's significant about that?
Sony
bought them the next year.
Yeah.
Sony's ownership
The
killed
suits. The suits came in, yeah. And when the suits came in, the dynamic changed completely. So, and therein lies the thing to me. So, as we see these things happening today, so, you know, Disney acquiring Fox, that's studio again.
Yeah.
So that's back to the old school studio kind of thing. Now, when an Apple or a Netflix or an Amazon engages in this stuff, I don't really think of them as studios.
I don't
These
either.
are corporations that have arms that make movies or television shows or streaming content.
Yeah.
But they're not movie studios. There's no Louis B. Mayer at the top of any of those.
True. However, I think eventually there's going to have to be. And even though they want to pretend that there's something new, I think they're going to have to eventually morph into something that is a combination of the old and the new. You know, Netflix doesn't own a studio lot, but they occupy part of a lot, right? They occupy the old KTLA, the old Gene Autry thing there, which was originally I think the original Warner Brothers lot in Hollywood. And Amazon just bought the old Selznick lot, which is the Culver Studios, which I love because that's a cool lot.
Yeah.
And you know, so I think
all those little bungalows,
bungalows. It's wonderful. It's hardly changed since those days. It's wonderful. And so I think there is a steady realization that there is, you know, at least for the creative community, we appreciate you more if you recognize our heritage. Film heritage means something to us. It really does. We, even if the general public doesn't care, film people know. They know they have an appreciation for what the studio system was and where we came from and old movies. And I guarantee you, every movie star today can start rattling off their favorite black and white movies from the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. Oh man.
All right, so let's get in. I'm going to talk about a few music things real quick. We got some great ones in from Naxos. Some beautiful stuff. This is unbelievable. Simon Rattle, one of the great conductors of all time, conducting the Berlin Philharmonic in Mahler's Symphony No. 6. This is phenomenal. This is something worthy of Mahler. Let me tell you, this is a completely custom book-looking thing for your shelf. It will not fit anywhere that you can put other Blu-rays or CDs. It is a 2 CD and 1 Blu-ray set that also includes a documentary about Simon Rattle, as well as concert video and studio masters. There's even a 7-day digital concert hall voucher. This thing is really phenomenal. And it's a great gift, too, if you have any reason to give anybody a gift anytime soon. Maybe even hang on to it for the holidays. But it's really, really terrific. You have 2 different recordings of Mahler's Symphony No. 6 on CD No. 1 from June 2018. And then from November of 1987. And they are both absolutely terrific. I'm not enough of a complete and crazy classical audiophile to tell you which one is better, but they're pretty great. And then obviously on the Blu-ray, you get everything and high-res audio, and it's pretty fantastic. Obviously, the 1987 concert was not shot. That one you only get in audio. The one that you have the video of is the 2018 one, but it's pretty great. And then you can download high-resolution audio files and do what you want with them. It's crazy. And the digital concert hall thing is really, really interesting. There's this streaming service that they have now with the Berlin Philharmonic, and this gets you in on that. If you are any kind of a classical music wonk, that's a dream come true. That's a really cool thing. And that is just a big old brick of a thing. Another big old brick, but this one will fit on your shelf, is the John Neumeier collection. And this is a limited edition. And John Neumeier, of course, kind of a legendary fixture in the world of ballet, and really an extraordinary stager and choreographer, just a visionary in so many respects. And this includes The Little Mermaid, Tatiana, based on the Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, Nijinsky. And I'm going to do my best to actually pronounce this in a way that makes sense, because this is by Bach, and you would think I'm half German, so I'd be able to pronounce this. Weihnachtsoratorium.
The night of...
Yeah, the Oratorio of Christmas.
Oratorio of Christmas?
Yeah.
Weihnacht.
Yeah, it's the Christmas Oratorio. Weihnachtsoratorium. But that's, you have to say it that way if you're going to be faithful to Bach. Anyway, the best of these, I think, is The Little Mermaid, not just because my daughter loves the Disney film, but because it really is extraordinary choreography. It's just beautiful, beautiful, daring ballet. It's really great. And Nijinsky, of course, is great as well. So this is from C Major. It's on Blu-ray, and it is a serious treat. We also have Gluck's Orpheus and Euridice, Orphée et Euridice. Opera staged by Hofesh Schechter and John Full James for the Teatro alla Scala. It's an opera. It's fine. It's not my speed, but it's Gluck. I'm not a big fan of Gluck. Anyway, Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker has been out 1 million times. This is another really, really good one done by the ballet company of the National Opera of Ukraine, which is wonderful. It's really totally classic staging. And Nutcracker has been done in a really lot of avant-garde versions, kind of very, very modern interpretations. This one is not. It's Ukraine. It's classic. We're going to go old school Russian, and it's beautifully art directed and beautifully set directed. It's really fantastic. From Dynamic, we have Nino Rota, The Night of a Neurotic, La Notte di un Nevrastenico. Pretty cool. Nino Rota, for those who don't know, didn't just do movie music, also did some pretty extraordinary opera work, and really a seminal figure in Italian music, classical and cinema. And this is one of those operas that I had never heard of, but it's really, really good, and it's beautifully staged by the by conductor Gabriele Bonolis and director Cesare Scarton, along with the Reata Festival Orchestra. It's just beautiful. The Rameau. This is another opera. I'm not familiar with Rameau, but the opera is Les Fêtes de l'Hymen et de l'Amour. This is an Egyptian thing that it's like an Egyptian themed opera, an old Egypt themed opera, staged by the Opera Lafayette and the New York Baroque Dance Company. And it's very modern. It's really elaborate. The costumes are extraordinary. The dance is very, very impressive. It's like an opera ballet fusion is probably the best way to put it. And this was written in the 1700s by Jean-Philippe Rameau. So again, not that familiar with Rameau, but it's written in the 1700s, but it's very modern. It feels very modern. It's the kind of thing that modern audiences would respond to a lot more. Another beautiful brick of a box set, the Royal Ballet from Opus Arte, the Royal Ballet and the Royal Opera House, the Frederick Ashton Collection, Volume 1. There will invariably be more of these. This includes Rhapsody, The Two Pigeons, The Dream and Symphonic Variations, and Marguerite and Armand. Just lots of really, really wonderful stuff here with the ballets staged by Frederick Ashton that just are absolutely beautiful. Some wonderful music here: Satie, Liszt, Massenet, Rachmaninoff. It's really, really very impressive. It's a nice collection, and there will be many more of these. 3 Blu-rays: Royal Ballet at the Royal Opera House, the Frederick Ashton Collection, Volume 1. And then lastly, not from Naxos, but certainly the music speed of some other people. If you are fans of Glastonbury music, boy, you're going to love this. This is a Nick Rogue film that I didn't even know existed. This is Glastonbury Fayre, Fayre, which is capturing, a lot of great directors did the music concert, the music festival documentary route, and wound up doing actually some of their best work. Martin Scorsese certainly did it. The Maisleys did it. And this captures the madness of Glastonbury in 1971. It's not Woodstock, but it's not far. It's like the European Woodstock. And it's really it's a trip back in time. It's a trippy era. It's a trippy moment. And it's pretty amazing that they were able to get the trippiest director of the period to actually kind of throw his spin on it. But the nice thing is Nick Rogue doesn't do what he often does, which is, and certainly what he became famous for doing, which was imposing his style on things and becoming kind of risking being a style over substance filmmaker. He really does let Glastonbury have its own personality here. It really kind of shines through, and it captures that moment in a way that is not overly intruded upon by the filmmaker's sense of style. Glastonbury is a really amazing place too. For those who've never been to the United Kingdom or to England, Glastonbury is out kind of on the southern western part of England, and it's really kind of an old mystical Arthurian place. And they sort of own it. They own the fact that people wear funny clothes, and you can buy magic wares. And it really, the landscape there has some great history. There's the Glastonbury Tor, which is the remnants of an old monastery that sits on this lone hill, which has some really fascinating ancient origins, which was destroyed when they burned all the monasteries after Henry VIII decided we're not going to be a Catholic country anymore, and suddenly these religious wars took root. So it has a fascinating history. It's out beyond Stonehenge. You pass Stonehenge on the way out there. It's a great place to go. And Glastonbury Fayre, 1971, The True Spirit of Glastonbury. It's really a fascinating movie, and for Nick Rogue completists, you definitely want to check this out. Glastonbury Fayre, 1971, The True Spirit of Glastonbury. All right, Tim, new movies. What do we got?
Several, including some that were talked about during the recent awards season, including If Beale Street Could Talk. Really, really lovely poetic adaptation of James Baldwin.
I love. You know what I love about this movie, and I'll let you go right after this. But there are two things going on here. There's James Baldwin's prose, which is always beautiful, which is just a wonderful thing to read, a beautiful way with words. And then there's the fact that you're watching a movie, which has to be a visual medium. How do you translate that as poetic a filmmaker as Barry Jenkins is, and as good a writer as he is, how do you do that without, let it live as a movie, translate it into a movie, but not lose the elegance of the prose? And he did it. It's just enough voiceover to give you the taste, to leave that taste in your mouth. It's a beautiful thing.
And delivered in a beautiful way. Wonderful performance by Regina King.
It's so deserved.
So that Academy Award. Nicholas Bertel's beautiful score helped in that thing that you're talking about, carrying that lyricism and that poetry. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie with 3 Academy Award nominations from Barry Jenkins. So,
I've said from the beginning, I actually think it's a Bertolucci film. It feels like a Bertolucci film.
It's Besieged.
Exactly.
Is what it's a wonderful Tandy Newton film with David Thewlis by Bernardo Bertolucci. At Eternity's Gate was another one. An interesting film.
I went to the thing at the Saucer House and then I was late over here to interview LaToya. You were sitting there with LaToya because I was stuck there because I was blocked from getting out because Michael Mann and Al Pacino were blocking my way at the door. It was like
it's weird that they were even at a Julian Schnabel.
I know it was the place to be.
Yeah, the butterfly, the bellfly.
Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
One of my favorite films. Just love that movie. This is wonderful. Willem Dafoe again. Funny that he's playing. He's playing the character Van Gogh.
Yeah,
and I think he's got to be 20 or 30 years older than Van Gogh was when Van Gogh died.
He talked about that. So Schnabel talked about that at the Shindig, and he said, "Yeah, look, Vincent Van Gogh died, whatever age it was, 30 something or other, and Willem Dafoe is like 60 or something." He goes, "But Van Gogh lived a hard life, and Willem looks really good for his age, So he's like, so I had no problem with that, and it's true, Dafoe looks phenomenal.
He looks fantastic, and certainly Van Gogh looked much older than his 30-whatever years.
Older, yeah.
Oscar Isaac gave a great performance in this film too, as his brother Matthew Almaric. Anyway, it's a neat movie that I rather enjoyed. Special features, a few special features, including an audio commentary with the director Julian Schnabel. Julian's a wonderful painter. I like Julian as a filmmaker. Some people don't.
He approaches filmmaking as he approaches painting, which is what makes his films really interesting. They're unique. He doesn't consider himself a filmmaker per se. He's a painter who makes movies.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting.
Which is the opposite of, say, a Steve McQueen, who's also a fine arts painter. But he considers himself a narrative filmmaker.
And he taught Willem Dafoe how to paint for the movie.
Yeah.
He taught him how to do it.
And
so there's a lot of stuff in there that Willem Dafoe actually did paint. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, he's going to end up like a Stallone.
Hopefully better than that. Stallone's
Sam
not
Elliott.
bad.
Stallone is a rather good painter. People like to make fun of him, but I'm sorry, I don't. Yeah. The man who killed Hitler and then Bigfoot.
Yep.
Our Sam Elliott, who you tell me you saw.
I saw Sam Elliott this week. So I was at a coffee shop having a little sit down and catch up with a common friend of ours. And Sam Elliott comes, moseying in like he just got off a horse, all kind of bow-legged and stiff looking, but looking great. And it was, it's hard not to stare sometimes, because it's Sam freaking Elliott. He just had an Oscar nomination.
A little renaissance of the career, including this movie, which is perfectly insane, but nevertheless,
he's so good in it.
And a guy who was assigned to kill Hitler years ago, years later, is brought in by the Canadian government to go after Bigfoot. The juxtaposition of Hitler and Bigfoot. I'm sure that there's something deeply psychologically significant in that, but
it's a ridiculous concept, and the only reason it works is because he is such a great actor. He totally sells it. Plays it straight.
Yeah. That's why you have to play something like this straight. The Man Who Killed. Special features, deleted scenes, the making of The Man Who Killed Hitler and then Bigfoot. I love the very particular title of the film right there. So neat stuff, relatively speaking, I suppose. Nancy Drew.
Yeah.
Nancy Drew and the Hidden Staircase. I like this little series of movies. They're fun.
Yep.
This one is no different than any wonderful Nancy Drew series. My wife read every single one of those books when we were a little kid.
And they are trying to reboot this now, so they've gone and recruited Sophia Lillis, who is an absolutely delightful actress, and she of course made her big debut in It, and wowed everybody, and then showed up on HBO playing the young Amy Adams in Sharp Objects, which is now going to get a second season. It's going to be blown out into a thing now. But yeah, she's a they've updated the spiral staircase for the digital era. There's a whole like cell phone thing going on, and they're trying to make it all kind of hip and modern. And it's still basically the same story. I will say this: it's and Ellen DeGeneres produced this, by the way. Ellen DeGeneres got behind this. I don't know if they're going to be able to get a franchise out of this because the writing is kind of sloppy and silly, even though Sophia is terrific. So if they can squeeze more movies out of this, it's because of her. It's because she's really, really good. And because maybe there is a generation still left to discover this. But anyway, for me at least. My reaction was, I know it's silly, but bring on some Hardy Boys too.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Look, the storylines here, I would have liked it better if they had simply adapted the storylines directly from the books.
Yeah,
as opposed to trying to get creative and original and contemporary and all that kind of stuff. And I know you got to figure out a way to get cell phones and computers into it, but do that instead.
Yeah.
But that's okay with me. Okay with me. The Last Man, Hayden Christensen and Harvey Keitel. Haven't seen Harvey in a while.
Yeah. And, you're going to see a lot of him in The Irishman, the Scorsese film.
Yeah, coming up.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty intense little movie here about a combat veteran with PTSD who decides that the world is about to be destroyed, and he starts building this compound for him and his family. He gets involved with Harvey Keitel, this all like Messiah-like figure, and it's kind of like Shelter. You remember that Michael Sheen film Shelter, where he was the one walking around saying everything's gonna go, and then it kind of did. So it's something like that, only a little bit more action oriented.
Yeah, sweet.
Let's see. What else do we?
Let me hit some
docs.
Let me hit some 4Ks because we got a few new movies on 4K.
And I'll hold on to these docs for a moment.
So they were able to get to us with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse on 4K. And this is a significant step up from the Blu-ray. Got to be honest, the HDR really, really seriously matters. Sony, of course, the originators of Blu-ray and 4K Blu-ray UHD. Their HDR is really, really super dazzling. You, of course, get the digital movie here on Movies Anywhere if you want to add it to your Movies Anywhere account. And ignore what it says. Offer expires on 12/31/2020. No, it doesn't. Nothing on Movies Anywhere ever expires. I don't know why they even bothered to do that, but it really, really is dazzling. The reds, the blues, everything just pops in a whole different way when you're watching this on a high def on a 4K set through with HDR. It really, really pops. It's designed for it, and it really has a cinematic quality, much more so than the Blu-ray. It is one of the few titles I've seen where that is a significant improvement, and you really, really do notice it. Not far behind, oddly enough, is another animated 4K release this week. 2 full-length features on this double feature of Hellboy animated, Sword of Storms and Blood and Iron. Part of it is because Hellboy is just so freaking red that the contrast between that red and everything else just jumps out at you. It's not in the same league as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but you really, really do. You're very aware of the fact that you're watching something in 4K, and that the Ultra HD is really giving you something entirely different. There's some extras on here too, quite a lot of interesting extras. Mostly featurettes, behind the scenes stuff. Inside stuff on Hellboy, and there's even an audio commentary that is really, really good with some of the principal contributors to Blood and Iron. That one's really, really tops. The interesting thing, the reason this is coming out now, obviously, is because there's a new Hellboy movie, which is coming out soon.
With a new Hellboy,
and a whole new take on it. They're obviously trying to franchise it into something else. Guillermo del Toro was the godfather of the last 2 Hellboy movies, and they feel they ran their course with those. So we'll see. But they're obviously very methodically trying to make Hellboy a thing again. Also on 4K, we have Bumblebee, the Transformers spin-off. I don't really get the point of any of these movies.
Haley Steinfeld was in it, and that's great.
But they're all still the same. They're not doing anything.
And literally, the narrative, the actual storyline of that one is the same storyline that was the storyline in the very first one that starred Shia, where he finds it's literally the same.
It's exact. I know. They need to kind of stop. Don't even reboot it. Just let it be a thing. It lives there. and just stop spending so much money on this because you're not going to get it back. What I actually prefer on this is that there's a really interesting what they call an animated motion comic, Bumblebee's Next Adventure. That's really interesting. Because it's different. It's not the same old thing. And then there's a bunch of outtakes and deleted scenes and stuff like that. It's a two-disc set. And then the last two here, this is very interesting. There's a new Pet Sematary coming out, too.
Yep.
So they released... I remember
covering the junket for that in 1990, 3? Or
yeah. The original Pet Sematary has now been released on 4K. That is bold. That is obviously assuming that there is a huge audience for this. Directed by Mary Lambert, who was one of the first directors at the time, female directors, to kind of make the leap into genre material. Mm-hmm. The other one being Catherine Bigelow. Catherine Bigelow and Mary Lambert were pioneers. They were not making chick flicks. Yeah. They were not making
as
women's
opposed to
films.
Susan Seidelman, Desperately Seeking Susan, or who?
They were not, or Penny Marshall. They were not making movies that very clearly had a female quality to them. They said, "I'm going to go and I'm going to play with the boys." What's very upsetting is that Mary Lambert's career really didn't go anywhere after this. She was not rewarded for this, and that's upsetting. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a story. I'd love to talk to her about that. I'm sure she's got some feelings about that. But nonetheless, this is the 30th anniversary release of Pet Sematary. I don't know. I hear the new one is terrific, but this one is also terrific.
Yeah.
And this is a really good film. And has some great extras on it. New interview with Mary Lambert, where she doesn't really go deep. I mean, she's plugging the movie. I'd love to hear the deep stuff. There are some new galleries, image galleries. She does an audio commentary as well. Goes into a lot of interesting stuff. The original Pet Sematary on 4K is very impressive. And lastly, Tim, let's talk for a second about Clint Eastwood's The Mule. Which...
expected to do better during the award season than it did.
Came and went. Bradley Cooper shows up in this, too. Which was not really widely mentioned. He was doing his own thing with Star is Born. But nonetheless, the Mule is about, it's Clint kind of playing himself. He hasn't acted in one of his own movies in a long time.
Although it's loosely based on a true story.
Loosely based on a true story about a guy in his 80s who's kind of, hit the skids, and he gets a chance to sort of kind of pull himself together financially by being a drug mule. And all of the things that are wrapped around that are really psychologically very interesting. But does it work? Ultimately, it doesn't. Why doesn't it work?
And neither did the other old man movie, Robert Redford's.
Yeah.
Old Man and the Gun.
Yeah.
Also loosely based on a true story.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's because, one of the things that doesn't work in that Clint Eastwood movie is that the character is literally not likable.
Yeah.
If I knew this man and he is as Clint played him, I wouldn't like him.
Yeah.
And I would root for him to get caught. Old Man and the Gun, that character was kind of likable in a certain sort of way. He was irascible anyway. Yeah. But at the end of the day, he was still an asshole.
Yeah.
Con man.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't like asshole con men. They're not likable characters, and I don't think that I could find the heroic figures that were meant to be found in those two characters.
See, that's what it is. That's the point. That's you nailed it. So ultimately, Sissy Spacek saw all kinds of things in him in The Old Man and the Gun that I didn't.
Yeah.
And I loved her, and I'm willing to trust her to a point, but she saw things in him that I did not, and I couldn't get over that hump. And that's the thing, is that there's something that they're trying to portray as heroic about this figure, something mythic in this figure in the Mule, which I could buy that only because of Clint, but ultimately Clint only gets me to a point.
Yeah.
Right? His persona gets me only so far. Redford's persona and Sissy Spacek's love only get me so far. At a certain point, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to go, yeah, but I still can't cross that hurdle. You've got to sell the character in some other ways. So anyway, all right.
And the thing of it is, these guys are not good guys.
All right, let's move into some docs. We've got a lot of docs, and we haven't really taken a deep dive into some of these cool docs in a while. So let's dive onto some of this.
All righty, I've got a few over here. I'll start with a cute one. Pick Up the Litter. It's a documentary about these little bitty puppies who are just the cutest things in the world. Who, from the moment they're born, they're going to be trained to be seeing eye. The dogs.
Yeah,
and that's how. And it basically explains the way that works. If you've ever wondered where seeing eye dogs come from, well, this movie will explain it to you. It takes a dog with a very particular temperament. I'm a dog lover. Me and Birch had dogs for years and years and years. Neither of our dogs would have been good.
I remember those dogs.
They're guide puppies. So it's a lovely documentary about that. On to something a bit more ominous. Honduras is a country that is, relatively speaking, lawless.
Yeah,
highly murderous, run more or less by drug cartels.
It's a problem all through Central America.
All through Central America,
yeah,
and only getting worse. The Olancho is a certain kind of band that roams around Mexico, Honduras, Salvador, many of these places. And what they do is they write these songs that are homages to the drug cartels and leaders of drug cartels. And they are employed to play at these lavish parties and sometimes parties thrown for communities.
Yeah.
And sing these songs and homage. Of course, sometimes this gets them killed if they say something in one of their songs negative about a different drug cartel guy. So this film is all about that. And while that in and of itself is kind of interesting, what's going on and the explanation of what's the problem is in Honduras is more interesting. That's the truly interesting thing about this documentary. These people, well, that is what it is. Cuban Food Stories by Asori Soto. This is just a lovely, lovely film about this young filmmaker who had to flee Cuba many years ago, as was the case when the Soviet Union arrived. And many years later, returning back to his home in Cuba and rediscovering the foods of his youth, the food that his grandmother and great-grandmother used to cook. And then, sort of like making a little movie about it all while he's there. It's a lovely, lovely a doc about Cuba, but it's mostly about the food, and you might enjoy it. Jihadist, an unparalleled look into extremists in Islam. This I happened to talk about this movie on Film Week. So this is just look,
sobering.
It's absolutely sobering. Actually banned in France. This movie. So these filmmakers managed to talk themselves into the ranks of these jihadists.
Yeah.
As filmmakers, and these jihadists are completely and totally candid with them about everything that they think and what they do. What's sobering about it is how earnest all of these perfectly insane people are. These jihadists are about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and a purer form of Islam.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Sometimes I find it absolutely fascinating that there is still this sort of. We were just talking about your epic you're writing.
Yeah.
The thinking in this is from Byzantium.
Yeah. It is of another planet, another era. Yeah, it is. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's nuts. Anyway,
persists in the present day. It's medievalism in the present day.
Yeah, no.
The Byzantine era revisited. Yeah.
The Lost Village. This is a neat little doc about the loss of Greenwich Village in New York. Years and years ago, when I was in high school, my father kidnapped me. Not really, but he took me one day from school. And said, "Come with me, boy." And we jumped in the car and we drove to New York from St. Louis, where he was playing a couple of gigs, and he said we should hang out. And man, it was fantastic in the late '80s. And Greenwich Village was one of the places where we played and hung out and did stuff. And it was a very sort of particular bohemian community, as we've all thought about it. I can think of so many movies that were set in Greenwich Village. The Pope of Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
That place doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist. Gentrification. Like every place here in Los Angeles where we're from, it's all changed. And this is about the Lost Village. It's an expose of how that counterculture of the 60s and 70s has basically been turned into condos and chain stores.
You remember when we made Schlock, one of my great contribution to Schlock was being able to arrange for us to shoot the demolition of the last drive-in on the west side of Los Angeles, which was over in the kind of the Mar Vista, Culver City-ish Fox Hills area, and right near the Fox Hills Mall, and it's all condos now. And we were there with 2 cameras rolling when that thing was blown apart.
I'm so happy that we arrived in L.A. in 1990, early enough to have actually gone to a couple of films there.
Yeah,
it's funny. We talked about Pet Sematary earlier. We saw Pet Sematary.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
that's
right.
crazy. Got some here from PBS. Really good stuff from PBS. So, Dr. Lucy Worsley. takes 2 hours on Victoria and Albert the wedding to recreate the famous wedding of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and it is extraordinary. I mean, this is a work of this is when historians really earn their keep. She's not teaching you a course. You're not taking notes. She's not, doing it in a very dry way. She is restaging that whole wedding based on what we actually know. This is really good history stuff. And not only that, but she goes into all of the details of it and what it means and how it changed basically the way that the Western world understood what a wedding was and how weddings took place. Royal weddings were not the same before as they were after the wedding of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and it is really pretty cool. So it's 2 hours. You got to really be into royal weddings to fully appreciate that, but it's pretty great. The USS Indianapolis, the final chapter. So in 1945, this is all kind of tied in with the atomic bomb a little bit. The USS Indianapolis was sunk by a Japanese submarine right after the dropping of the first atomic bomb. And it's not one of the sinkings. It's not up there with, anything that happened at Midway or Pearl Harbor. It's not one of those legendary moments from World War II until you realize that this is literally, to this day, the worst loss of life in the history of the United States Navy. 300 sailors died, and 900 wound up surviving. There were, and what they went through to survive. It's extraordinary. I mean, this is an amazing piece of history. And so what they do is this is a documentary where they go and they revisit the story, they revisit the wreck, and kind of reconstruct this horrible history and the aftermath as well for those who did survive. It's a story from World War II and the Pacific Theater that is unfortunately really it's lost. People don't really know much about the Indianapolis, so it's great. The PBS series Nature has a great installment here. This is a 2-hour Nature installment called Equus, the Story of the Horse. And it's effectively a history lesson in the relationship between men and horses. And the anthropologist Niobe Thompson basically guides us on this, talking to a lot of experts in a lot of different fields to go into the origins of when human beings first looked at a horse and said, I bet I could ride that. I could tame that thing. Be a lot. I'm tired of walking. I'll bet I could get from here to the next village a whole lot faster and it'd be easier on my feet. I could get on that thing's back. And, we don't think about that. We take horses for granted. But,
I've always thought to myself, nobody ever asked the horse. Hey, can I get on your back? And the thing of it is, they call it horse breaking for a reason.
Yeah. Anyway, it's really interesting, and it's something that apparently happened not in one place, but in a lot of places simultaneously.
Yeah.
So,
like the adoption of language.
The domestication of dogs, as well.
Yeah.
There wasn't like one original dog that was domesticated and suddenly it'd get a shout out from, it's not like somebody in India domesticated a dog and then get a shout out to Scandinavia and hey, Egypt. And
you can do this, right?
Yeah. No, these are things that all are kind of simultaneous. It's really, really interesting. And it's 110 minutes long and worth every single second of it. So Nova, the installment of Nova, Apollo's Daring Mission. This is very good. It's an hour long, but it is not, the recent feature film, the IMAX release of on the Apollo mission is the one to see. That's the big mama.
Yeah.
This is fine. In this, 50-year anniversary, there are going to be a lot of these. We're going to be seeing a lot of these documentaries about the Apollo mission and so forth and so on, and they're all worth checking out. Just make sure you don't miss the big one.
Yeah.
The Apollo 11. Film that was released on IMAX.
A lot of original archived footage never
seen. It's tremendous. But this, in particular, is about an earlier mission, Apollo 8, which was the first manned mission to the moon, but not a landing on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a lot of people know, Apollo 1 was the one where the astronauts died, including the famous Gus Grissom, who, of course, is depicted in The Right Stuff. And
Fred Ward
playing Gus Grissom beautifully. And so Apollo 8 was the one that was preparatory to Apollo 11 because they had to orbit the moon. They had to show that we could actually get physically to the moon and back again. And then we'll worry about landing you.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure we can even get there and back again. So in many respects, Apollo 11, yeah, it was a big deal, but these guys are just as courageous, and they're kind of unsung and unheralded.
And the great drama of that event, of course, is because they go around the moon, to the dark side of the moon. Yeah. We didn't have enough satellites positioned yet, so there's that whole chunk of time.
Blackout.
When there was this big blackout. Now, if the slingshotting effect of the gravitational pull of the moon doesn't work the way it has been calculated by a black lady, by the way, then for all we know, they slingshot off into space.
Yeah.
But no, her math was correct.
Damn right. Good for her. Yeah. Rock on. Hidden Figures. So anyway, Apollo 8 is the subject of Apollo's daring mission, but remember, Apollo 11, the movie, is the big mama. And then that leads us into another nova, Pluto and beyond. So just for everybody, just so you know, Pluto's a planet. I don't care what all these so-called experts say. Seriously, I don't give a damn what they say. It's a planet. And I got really mad, and they almost had to escort me out of the Griffith Planetarium when I took my daughter there for the first time, because it says something like, it's a semi kind of pseudo planet. I started like literally screaming like some kind of a drunk homeless man. I was so angry. I said, it's a planet. So anyway, that aside, that minor disagreement. This gives us a lot of really, really amazing stuff from the Ultima Thule probe flyby thing. Ultima Thule is this object on the outskirts of the solar system, and it's considered to possibly be the oldest existing thing in the solar system, older than all the planets themselves. So it's sort of it's like the Rosetta Stone of the solar system. So this all happened on New Year's of this year, that the Pluto probe did its little flyby of Ultima Thule, and this gets into everything that is related to that, and the Kuiper belt and all these things that are sort of on the outskirts of the solar system. Really super interesting, very, very well done, and I wish it was longer than 60 minutes.
Fantastic. I love that stuff.
Awesome. Good. Yeah.
I got a few.
Okay.
Over here, including this film by Judd Apatow. I'll tell you why this film is interesting. The very fact that Judd made it. Judd was a mentee, I guess is what you call, of Gary Shandling. This is called The Zen Diaries of Gary Shandling.
Nice.
So lost Gary back in 2016. Gary Shandling was always one of the funniest comedians from that era of comedians that included guys like Robert Klein and Richard Lewis and
Jay Leno.
Jay Leno guys. That was Jerry Seinfeld of a certain age. And Gary was right there. A little bit older than most of those guys, except for maybe Klein. And I did not know how well considered he was by all of them. As I say, he was a mentor to Judd Apatow, who, since his death, took it upon his time to sit down with a whole bunch of people who knew and worked with Gary Shandling and make this film. It's basically a homage to a man that he loved very much. It's a two-part film, 120 minutes and 150 minutes, respectively. All kinds of bonus features, including an interview with Judd. And extended scenes with the many people who were interviewed in this film, who all say that he had a very interesting life in and of itself, Gary. But the specific thing that they're talking about in this movie is what a wonderful person he was to people like them and everyone around him, and how everybody loved him. And I always think that's an interesting thing. So the Zen Diaries of
love it,
Gary Shandling. Mr. Capra Goes to War. Frank Capra during World War II made a number of documentaries, number of docs.
Considered sort of criticized because they were propaganda films, but also praised because they were really damn good propaganda films.
They were very good propaganda films. They were all George Stevens. They were all. Yeah. If you're making a film during wartime, you're making a propaganda film. I don't care. That's the nature of the thing. But they really were wonderful, and there were a number of them. 1, 2, 3, 4 of 5 of them are contained in this Blu-ray. Frank Capra's World War II documentary, Mr. Capra Goes to War. Prelude to War was the first of them. Why We Fight is a part of that series. You've probably seen those before as part of television shows and things like that. Yeah. The Battle of Russia, a 2-part documentary there. One that I'm particularly fond of, The Negro Soldier, which was produced and directed by him. It covers the 1936 Berlin Games, in which Jesse Owens participated in a complicated series of events, and the Tunisian victory. The Tunisian victory, not always covered as a part of the series of documentaries made about the war. There. So very, very interesting stuff. Several special features as well, including an analysis of Why We Fight by Joseph McBride, friend of ours.
Yeah. Good job.
Film historian, and some other things. So a really, really, really lovely set of films that are not It's a Wonderful Life.
Divide and Conquer, the story of Roger Ailes, is a really, really good documentary. And the thing is, it's very hard to make documentaries about controversial people and have them be significantly balanced enough to not feel like you're either putting this person on a pedestal or just taking them down and doing a hatchet piece. This manages to actually be very, very even-handed, as even-handed as you can be with somebody like Ailes. So, Roger Ailes, big political operative, going all the way back to the Reagan administration, basically built Fox News for the Murdochs from the ground up. Built every single aspect of it, hired all the original talent, managed it like a king, until he became one of the first to tumble in the Me Too era. But right before Harvey Weinstein, by the way. He was the precursor.
Roger was more clever than all of them, though.
He was.
Yeah, because he died.
He died in 2017.
He knew to just die.
Yep.
So you win, Roger.
He won before the Harvey thing broke and everybody else took. He got it all anyway. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it's very, very thorough. And the thing about Roger Ailes is that asymmetrical face. Half of it just drooped lower than the other half. I don't know what gravity did to him, but it was not fair.
Yeah.
So that being said, Roger Ailes, really a seminal figure in our day. I mean, he changed the landscape of television news. He pioneered things at Fox that have trickled over to MSNBC and CNN and elsewhere that have changed how for better or worse.
Yeah, sometimes in the reverse. The thing of it is, prior to Roger, there were conservatives in the media and on the news. So it's not like George Will. It's not like conservative voices weren't there. He aggregated them into one spot, but then he also threw out truth.
Yeah.
So it's not the conservative thing that's the problem.
What he did was he brought the mindset, which to an extent it was a proper merging with Murdoch. They were of a kind. Murdoch brought the world of tabloid journalism into legit journalism. Ailes brought the world of talk radio into mainstream news, and that tabloided everything. And you could argue that everything was moving that way to begin with, that in the internet age and the 24-hour news cycle, that's sort of what people want. I don't know if it's what people want, but even if it's what they want, it's not what they need.
Yeah.
So, it is it's fodder for thought, fodder for conversation, but for better or worse, one of the most influential figures we've had in a long time. The Last Race was this was Oscar nominated, I'm pretty sure. I didn't check that before the show, but this is actually a very, very solid doc, also from Magnolia, from 2017, which this is all about the world of stock car racing, and specifically focuses on a particular stock car track in Long Island, and the people who have owned it for decades and decades and decades, family-owned thing, and how they're going to reconcile themselves to the inevitability of the land being so valuable that it's going to have to be converted. We were just talking about converting, into condos, the old drive-ins. Same thing with racetracks. In a lot of these places where real estate value has skyrocketed, what do you do when suddenly, you got to let go of something that is kind of central to the community and let it become something else? Same thing in United Skates, the documentary that we talked about on Film Week some weeks ago, which we'll shortly talk about again when it's on DVD, which is all about the relevance of skating rinks, roller skating rinks, especially in the inner city and in black communities, which suddenly are going away and being replaced by condos and everything else. So you have this is sort of the blue collar white working class version of that, and stock car tracks, even Hollywood Park, for crying out loud.
Oh yeah.
Horse racing tracks. This is happening everywhere in this gentrification trend. So this looks at the stock car racing aspect of that. Kusama Infinity, the life and art of Yayoi Kusama. Kusama is, of course, one of the great artists of our day, a very eccentric Japanese artist who loves polka dots and designs and all kinds of other things. And
you've seen her work.
Oh, you've totally seen her work.
At scale.
There was a recent Kusama mirrors exhibit here at the Broad downtown, and I went down there with my wife and my daughter and a friend of mine from film school. And it was extraordinary. You go into these little mirror chambers and take some photos, and you're only allowed in there for like 15 seconds. And then you have to leave, and the next people go in. Really a singular artist, fascinating. And
the great doc, because the doc begins with her as a youth, as a child in Japan.
Yeah.
Where she experienced some absolutely fascinating things, none the least of which was finding out and observing her father in this particular affair.
Yeah.
Which sort of directed her in the way and shaped her personality for the rest of her life. What I love about that doc and about her is that in the 60s, well before Andy Warhol, she was just a bulldog.
That's true.
As she came to America, a Japanese woman, and she was just a bulldog about her work and her art, and she just went to New York, and she simply walked into galleries and said, I'm going to show here. You should clear that wall for me.
That's great.
And the thing of it is, it worked.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
She's a fascinating figure. And then on Blu-ray, this came out actually some months ago, but I wanted to give it proper time. Amir Bar-Lev is an unbelievable filmmaker. Did the Tillman Story, which my wife worked on.
About Pet Tillman.
And just an extraordinary filmmaker, but really outdoes himself with Long Strange Trip, The Untold Story of the Grateful Dead. So this doc is 4 hours long. I just want to underline this. This is a 4-hour documentary about the Grateful Dead. Now, I had to cover this on Film Week. The week that it was released. And I remember, our Film Week rundown, Tim will testify to this. You love movies that are 80 minutes long, because that means that you can start packing those movies in that week and a half that you have to really cram, and you could just knock them out. And when you want me to spend 4 hours watching one movie, I'm like, do you realize how many other Film Week movies I have to see? How many I can see in this 4-hour period? I could get 3 other movies almost in this 4-hour period. Okay, Grateful Dead, fine. I don't even like the Grateful Dead. I've got friends who are deadheads. The newspaper where Tim and I met was owned. And
my God!
The editor-in-chief was the owner's son. He was a crazy deadhead. Had like tapes galore. It's too much dead in my life.
Yeah.
I don't want to watch a 4-hour movie about anything, much less the Grateful Dead. That makes it even worse. Fine. You know what? I'll put it on in the background when I'm folding my laundry and doing dishes. I'll put it on my iPad. I'll carry it around the house with me. I'll absorb enough to be able to say something informed on Film Week, because am I actually going to like this anyway? I put this on, and for 4 hours, my laundry did not get folded.
Yeah.
I was riveted. From beginning to end, this is one of the great documents. This wound up on my top 10,
and mostly because of the way it reveals Jerry Garcia.
That's it.
It's
not about the music.
No, not really. Which is why you don't have to like the music.
Yeah.
No, it's the sort of we had a movie a little called The Zen of.
Yeah.
They could call that the Zen of Jerry Garcia.
It is so interesting, the drama of how the band came together, of how they endured all of these various forces and issues, including including drug addiction, namely Jerry's, and the philosophy behind it, and then their sort of resurgence in the 1990s. You know, it really is incredibly intriguing, and especially Jerry Garcia, who's really kind of a true civil libertarian in every fiber of his body.
Jerry just didn't judge anybody.
Nobody, man. You know. And it gets down to a point where when suddenly it wasn't just deadheads in their concerts, but it was, you know, everybody who wanted to be trendy, and suddenly these people are misbehaving, and there's violence and drug abuse in the concerts. And the band was all together saying, you know, maybe we need to send out a message to these people saying this will not be tolerated at our concerts. And the one who wouldn't sign on was Jerry.
Yeah.
Because he says, you know what? My job is to play the music. Whatever they do, they're going to do. Not my responsibility. I'm not there to judge them. I'm not there to tell them what to do or what not to do. They're going to do what they're going to do. I'm going to play my music.
And they will deal with the consequences of what they do.
That's it.
And I will deal with the consequences of what I do.
It is so purely his philosophy of life that guided him. And that's part of what makes sitting there for 4 hours watching this so compelling. And Bob Weir's, you know, sitting there all funky in a yoga pose, and it's, you know, it's a great documentary. It's on Blu-ray, and it is a beautiful film on Blu-ray. And Amir Bar-Lev is the man. He is so the man. He is one of the great documentarians of our age.
My kid could paint that.
Long Strange Trip.
Yeah, I think I interviewed him. My kid could paint that. This is an interesting film. In the early 70s. Just about the time that portable cameras came onto the scene, because most people think that was the early 80s, but it wasn't. It was the early 70s when you could get those little separate porta-pack cameras. There was this collective of video makers that called themselves TV, Top Value Television, who at the time were just sort of like roaming around with these devices, shooting things just because they could, and they would cover like the 1972 Republican Convention, Super Bowl. I think it was like Super Bowl VI or something like that. Just all kinds of things. Now, what's interesting is who these people were and who they would turn out to be. And now one of them has collected their work into this. His name's Paul Goldsmith, and he's an alum of the group. This is some of the names of the folks who were wandering around with video cameras doing all kinds of things back in the early 70s. Bill Murray, John Belushi, Goldie Hawn, Hunter S. Thompson, Steven Spielberg, Lily Tomlin, Bob Dylan. All were little like nascent filmmakers, videographers, and/or reporters, depending on exactly what they were doing in the early 70s with this like new technology called video. And they did some absolutely fascinating coverage of iconic events, iconic people, and defining sketch comedy before there was really a thing such as. If you watch a show like Vice or 30 for 30 or something like that, you're watching what these guys were doing 45, in some cases, 45 years ago. And, you know, and it's not surprising that, like I said, they went on to become some of the most important people in comedy. Fantastic stuff. I love this documentary, Hot to Trot. This is a documentary about the world of same-sex competitive ballroom dancing.
Okay.
Same-sex competitive ballroom dancing.
Did not know that was a thing.
I didn't know it was a thing either, but you know what? It is. And what's wonderful about it is they're really good dancers.
I don't doubt it.
The same-sex stuff is, who cares? You guys, and I mean both of you, can really dance. Somebody had to learn to dance, backwards and in heels. The Breast Archives, a really wonderful doc by Megan Murphy. This is just a film about women literally exposing their breasts and talking about all of the issues that come with being a woman and having breasts that have nothing whatsoever to do with men, the male gaze, as they say, or what men are thinking, but rather just what it means to be a woman and to have breasts. And I think that that's an absolutely fascinating thing. Wim Wenders did this doc about Pope Francis. Pope Francis is a man of his word. Hope is a universal message. That's what the tagline is for this. I don't know. Pope Francis has turned out to be a rather controversial and difficult figure.
Yeah, it's true.
Over the, when he first came on the scene, talking that sort of liberal talk the way he did, and
he's earned the nickname the Red Pope.
Yeah, and I don't know. So perhaps them made this film a little too soon. I think is what I think about
Could be.
reign of this particular pope.
I'm going to make mention real quickly of Daniel Rivas' wonderful, wonderful documentary from Facets, Abrazos, Tango in Buenos Aires. This is, look, tango and Argentina go hand in hand, and that's always been, it's ground zero for the tango. And the Buenos Aires Tango Festival is where everybody really, really gets to go nuts. As long as we're talking about dancing, tango is a whole different thing. This goes to the 5th Buenos Aires Tango Festival, which you would think, really, 2003? There'd only been 5. It hasn't been going on since the 50s or the 40s, or no. They only did that in the late 90s in 2008. So this is from 2003, and it captures the 5th Buenos Aires Tango Festival in a beautiful way. Everything that's going on there. It is just a wonderful immersion in the culture of dance and everything to do with the tango and what it means to Argentina and what it means to these people. It's just really, really beautiful. And I don't love watching everybody do the tango, but I sure loved watching this movie about the tango. It's really a lot of fun. And then there's also Yoni Leiser's documentary Queer Core: How to Punk a Revolution. This is from alteredinnocence.net, and it features all kinds of interviews with central figures in this, including John Waters, of all people. And it's basically about queercore. And queercore is an aspect of gay culture that kind of emerged in the 1980s that was it was like a rebellious movement that was designed to push back against a lot of what was perceived as anti-gay in the punk movement, but it was also designed to push back against conformity and cultural pressures to assimilate and to become more like straight culture. And it was sort of co-opting things from the punk movement to bring into the gay rights movement at a time when punk was perceived to be homophobic and whatnot. So it really is. It's a kind of a little microcosm of a moment in time that didn't last very long, but it's as a historical observation of a particular subculture that was sort of a lightning in a bottle at that particular point in time in that place. Very, very interesting. And that is Queer Core: How to Punk a Revolution. Good doc.
Interesting stuff. Edith Tudor Hart is a well-known photographer, Australian-born photographer, and I think fairly well-known communist sympathizer for most of her life. She died in 1973. In 1993, it became known that she was a pretty notorious KGB agent.
Oh, good heavens!
And she was actually the person who introduced Kim Philby to the Soviets, and Kim Philby would go on to become one of the most, Russian spies ever. So this documentary is by her nephew, Peter Stephen Jonk, who sort of goes through the entire sort of history of her life and how she came to be a KGB agent, how she came to make that introduction. And it's a fairly interesting and fascinating sort of story, particularly as we move back into an era of, I don't know, let's say tension with the Russians. The Soviets are gone, but the tension with the Russians seem to remain, and there seems to be a good deal of spying going on again between our two countries.
It'll be that way forever.
Who knows? I'm pretty sure it actually never went away. This is an interesting doc, speaking of Russia, called Over the Limit. It's set behind the scenes of the Russian Olympic training system. This is specifically about a Russian rhythmic gymnast. Her name is Margarita Mum, and it's about the period when she's going to be vying for her probably last Olympic medal. This movie is really revealing. Now, rhythmic gymnast. I don't think a whole lot about that. But it doesn't really make any difference what the event is. What this film is about is that system and how vicious it is. And how they abuse the athletes, drugs and just verbal abuse and physical abuse and everything else. I mean, we think about the Tonya Harding thing here years ago, where Tonya took the thing, and we think, and then the movie that was made about that. This man. Had I known while I was watching Claudia Komenich and all of those wonderful, in the '80s, had I known that was happening to these kids, I think I would have watched. So, Over the Limit.
completing our dance and rhythmic gymnastics segment here, Impulso. Rocio Molina is arguably the greatest flamenco dancer in the world, and she's astonishing. I mean, as a choreographer, as a dancer, the whole thing. And this is all about the preparation for her new show for like a 2017 show at the Chaillot National Theater in Paris. And it's about the dance, it's about the staging of the show, it's about the history of flamenco, the art of flamenco, the pain of dancing flamenco. It is it's really amazing. So that is Impulso by Emilio Belmonte. That is a co-production of Spain and France. All about Rocio Molina, the rise of a flamenco prodigy. And it is, if you've never heard of her, and if you're not particularly into flamenco dancing, do yourself a favor. This thing will blow by. It is an absolute joy to watch. Nazi Junkies, the hidden history of drugs in the Third Reich. This is something people know about. It's talked about, kind of here and there in other films. And there was a book about it by Norman Ohler called Blitzed: Drugs in the Third Reich. And this is not a straight-up adaptation of the book, but it is inspired by the book, as they make a very clear point. They don't want to get sued. And so there are two episodes to this, two separate episodes. One on Hitler the Junkie, the other one Nazi Junkies. And look, they're provocative, you know. They're
the
provocative.
Word junkie
but
juxtaposed to Nazis.
It's really interesting because it goes into, in the 1930s, I mean, let's face it, Cab Calloway was talking about snorting cocaine in his songs.
There were opium dens all over Brooklyn, San Francisco.
The whole idea of drugs as a taboo, illegal thing did not really emerge until the 1950s with the marijuana scare. And suddenly that became a thing. And that's where the laws really, really caught up to the presence of drugs in the society. But there were more drugs being done during Prohibition than booze.
Yeah, they didn't call it Coca-Cola because it was made from a cola nut.
Right.
It was called Coke for that reason.
Exactly.
Different reason.
So the 1930s, it's not like the Nazis were a whole bunch of, like, hey man, let me get some smack from the dealer on the street. No,
give it the pharmacy.
It was considered something this was how we're going to make supermen. This is how we're going to make a super army. Drugs are a good thing. They're part of the way that we're going to enhance our abilities. And so it's fascinating to see how that permeated and in many respects destroyed the intellectual capacity of what they thought was going to be an Aryan super race and all of this. It's really, really very interesting, and it's very well backed up. So, and then lastly on my end, Strangers on the Earth, which is one of these sort of globe-trotting it's like one of these travelogues, one of these sort of poetic travelogues, and this is really it's quite a beautiful film. Dane Johansen is a cello player, and he wants to sort of experience the world through his instrument. And what he does is he makes a pilgrimage through Spain and plays his Bach. And just sort of enjoys the journey of traveling the Camino de Santiago, which is kind of this, which is a particular Spanish pilgrimage route that has been a pilgrimage of sorts for generations. So it's a guy playing cello while he goes to beautiful places. I don't know how
walks that Santiago.
It's quite beautiful, and I'd love to see sort of more movies like this that go to more places and do things like this. It's really quite pleasant. Strangers on the Earth.
The Obama years, The Power of Words. This is not about Barack Obama. It's about specifically six speeches that he gave over the course of his presidency. Of course, including the 2004 Democratic Convention speech, which more or less launched him as a figure in the popular mind of the United States. And these six speeches, and it is irrelevant about what you think of him or his presidency. What one cannot debate is the power of his writing and his actual personal oration. You have to go back to, in terms of political figures, Kennedy, Bobby, or Jack, to get to another person who spoke like this. Some people would say Reagan. I know that.
Yeah.
I know that. Reagan gave two. This is 6.
Yeah.
He gave about 12. So Reagan was a powerful speaker, but he didn't give that many speeches because, in that second term, he didn't come out that much. Yeah. So when he spoke, he was solid as a rock. Enjoyed me plenty of Reagan speeches. But this guy just knocked them out, and he wrote them.
Himself,
which is what's truly extraordinary. So, from the Smithsonian Channel, The Obama Years, The Power of Words, 6 great speeches.
All right, that does it for us this week, and so keep your eye on April 6th if you are a writer or interested in the shenanigans between the Writers Guild and the Association of Talent Agents. That 43-year battle, or that 43-year contract, comes to a head April 6th. It'll be fascinating. I don't know where that's going to go, but we're going to keep our eye on that ball. And until then, we will see you guys next week.